Okay, let's jump into this. We're doing a deep dive today into, well, a kind of shortcut, really, not just for investing, but maybe for mastering decision making, achieving, long-term success in life generally. We're drawing from William Green's book, Richer, Wiser, Happier.
Yeah, it's a fantastic resource. Green spent, gosh, years interviewing more than 40 legendary investors. We're talking giants like Sir John Templeton, Irving Kahn, Charlie Munger, just absolute titans. And our mission really is to pull out those nuggets of wisdom, that kind of worldly wisdom that works everywhere, not just in the markets. It's a lot about character, actually.
Absolutely. And you see that theme running through it all, don't you? The things that link these super successful people, well, it's often less about the financial wizardry and more about how they operate as humans. They're independent thinkers. They keep emotion out of it. They never stop learning. And their success seems really rooted in their habits, their character.
Right. It really shows that success starts, inside. They seem to spend less energy trying to predict, say, interest rates or the next big geopolitical event, and way more energy mastering themselves,
Right.
mastering their own reactions to those events. That self-control, that's where the real edge seems to be.
So let's start right there with identity. The book paints them as a pretty distinct bunch. Words like iconoclasts, mavericks, misfits keep cropping up. These are people who just fundamentally don't seem to need outside approval. They're okay looking foolish sometimes, and they really don't seem to care what the crowd is doing or thinking.
And that ability to stand apart, well, it's tough psychologically, isn't it?
Yeah.
There's this interesting idea from Francois Rochon who suggests maybe, just maybe, these folks lack what he calls the tribal gene.
Hmm.
That deep instinct we all have to stick with the group, especially when things feel dangerous.
Ah, right. So when the market tanks, that tribal gene is screaming, sell, run, everyone else is running. It's that instinct to just liquidate when prices fall off a cliff, often at the absolute worst moment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that overpowering herd instinct,
Hmm.
you can actually step back and think. You see the panic, maybe not as an existential threat, but, well, as an opportunity. You might realize, hey, this great company's suddenly cheap because everyone else is freaking out. So being willing to be a bit lonely, that seems like a prerequisite for getting those great returns.
Okay, but how do they manage that? How do they stay separate without feeling, I don't know, constantly attacked? It seems to come back to where they place their value, which brings us to that inner scorecard idea, something Buffett and Munger talk about a lot.
Right. Instead of looking outside, at news headlines or the stock price moving day to day or what pundits are saying, they look inside. They judge themselves purely by their own standards, their own values. So if they made a decision they believe was rational and well-researched, the fact the price dropped 50% the next day, well, that doesn't actually change their score of how well they did.
And those values, they often seem surprisingly, well, grounded. The book mentions this kind of overarching moral compass that life's a long game, and maybe the point is to use what you build to help others, to be of service. It seems to give the whole endeavor a meaning beyond just piling up money.
Yeah, and that deep sense of integrity, I think that's what fuels the conviction when everything seems to be falling apart. It's one thing to talk about conviction when the market's going up, right?
Okay.
But what happens when you make a call and you're immediately painfully wrong?
That makes me think of the Bill Miller story, just an incredible test of conviction. He'd taken this huge stake in a company, AES. Then, bam, they announced terrible earnings. The stock gets cut in half overnight. We're talking, what, a $50 million loss for Miller, like instantly?
Yeah, I mean, that's the kind of thing that would make most fund managers just completely unravel.
Yeah.
They'd be scrambling to cut losses, sell out, maybe hide under the desk. But Miller, what does he do? He calmly doubles down, bought more. His thinking was, the market's overreacting, the long-term picture hasn't changed, so now it's just an even better bargain.
Wow. No panic, just action based on his analysis. That really shows conviction isn't just talk, it's what you do under extreme pressure. And speaking of building strength, another theme that kept coming up was this idea of association, deliberately spending time with people smarter than you.
Absolutely. They seem to view intelligence, or maybe wisdom, as something you can catch, like a cold, but a good one. You actively curate your environment so you're constantly surrounded by smart thinking. It's a way to support that inner scorecard and make sure your ideas are always being challenged by the best.
Okay, so if conviction rests on character, let's dig into the thinking tools they use to make sure that conviction is actually, sound. We're talking about getting an edge through intense learning, sometimes even shameless cloning, as the book calls it, copying what works.
Oh, totally. The goal isn't necessarily to be original, right? The goal is to be right. Charlie Munger is the absolute poster child for this. He says it openly. I just observe what works and what doesn't and why.
Hmm.
Then he just copies the stuff that works. And he pulls tools from everywhere: biology, physics, math, psychology, philosophy. He talks about learning from dead people like Darwin, Einstein, building this lattice work of mental models.
And Munger's approach offers this amazing shortcut, the strategy of inversion, which he got, I think, from a 19th century mathematician, Carl Jacobi, who said, invert, always invert.
Exactly. Solve the problem backward. Instead of asking the really hard question like, how do I guarantee success?
Yeah.
You ask the often easier, clearer question: what would guarantee failure? You list all the dumb things you could do, the sure paths to disaster, and then you just make really sure you don't do any of them.
Can you give us a sort of practical example of that, how it works?
Sure. Let's say you wanted to help a complex system, like, I don't know, improve conditions in a specific country. Inversion says, first ask, what could we do to absolutely ruin this country, to guarantee misery? You list things like encouraging massive corruption, creating hyperinflation, destroying trust in institutions. Okay, once you have that list of guaranteed ruin, your strategy becomes simpler. Just avoid doing those things.
I see. That's incredibly powerful as a risk management tool. It reminds me of that pre-mortem idea, too, where before you make a big decision, you imagine it's already failed spectacularly, and then you work back to figure out why it failed so you can prevent those causes up front. It's all about survival first.
Survival is absolutely fundamental, which probably explains why so many of these investors see things in terms of probabilities. The link to card games is really striking. Templeton apparently paid for college with poker winnings. Buffett and Munger are famously obsessed with bridge. Mario Gelli used to make money playing cards as a caddy.
Yeah, Peter Lynch even said something like, learning poker or bridge is more valuable than reading every book on the stock market. Why is that connection so strong?
Well, think about it. Card games force you constantly to calculate odds, manage risk, make decisions with incomplete information, and crucially, they teach you that you can make the perfect decision and still lose the hand because of luck. Or make a mistake and get lucky. It hammers home that probabilistic thinking you need when the market throws randomness at you.
Okay, now let's touch on the complexity trap. These are obviously incredibly smart people, right? Yet they seem to actively resist complex solutions. Why do smart people get sucked into complexity?
That's a great question. I think complexity can feel sophisticated, maybe more intelligent, and frankly, it can justify higher fees in the financial world. But the truly great investors seem to grasp that the core principles are usually pretty simple. Joel Greenblatt just nails it. Figure out what something is worth and pay a lot less. That's basically it.
Beautifully simple. And Jack Bogle, the Vanguard founder, he always criticized the industry for pushing complicated, expensive products over simple, cheap ones, because the complexity often serves the seller, not the buyer, the investor.
Exactly right. Look at Josh Waitzkin, the chess prodigy who then became a world champion in Tai Chi push hands. Two really complex fields. But he stressed breaking things down into the absolute simplest components. He'd practice tiny, specific chess endgames, like king and pawn versus king, over and over to master the deep principles. Buffett says something similar. Complex behavior isn't the goal. Simple, rational behavior repeated consistently is far more effective.
So if the thinking game is about simplicity, the action game seems to be all about patience. Or maybe what the book calls heroic inactivity. This core idea that, hey, there are no extra points for being busy. Most of investing is just waiting for those really rare, obvious moments, the mispriced gamble, where the odds are massively stacked in your favor.
You absolutely have to be selective. Like Buffett famously said, you don't have to swing at everything. You can wait for your pitch. Most opportunities out there are just kind of average. So you just sit there patiently with cash, maybe, until that perfect fat pitch comes right down the middle.
But waiting is just so hard, isn't it? In a world that values action, constant motion, how do they build lives that actually support doing nothing most of the time? The Monish Pabrai example is just wild.
It really is. Pabrai actively structures his life to combat what he calls the natural bias for action, his calendar. 0 meetings, 0 calls, 0 obligations, basically. He forces himself into inactivity so he can spend his time reading hundreds of pages a day and playing online bridge. He designs his environment for deep thought, ensuring he only acts when an idea is truly, overwhelmingly compelling.
Wow. That level of intentional idleness, most people in business would feel unproductive, maybe even guilty. I remember reading about Francis Chow, another great investor, who apparently once had like 30% of his fund in cash and hadn't bought anything significant for years. The lesson seems to be you just can't force good opportunities.
You can't. The only time action seems truly mandatory is during what Sir John Templeton called the point of maximum pessimism.
Ah, Templeton's famous insight. He figured the only thing powerful enough to make a good stock absurdly cheap is widespread panic, when everyone else is desperately trying to sell. His rule was basically, that's exactly when you have to buy.
Pure emotional counterprogramming, isn't it? You're consciously telling yourself, beware of getting too excited when everyone's euphoric, and beware of getting too scared when everyone's terrified. You're using the market's emotional swings as your signal, while keeping your own emotions completely level.
And that focus on emotional control, it ties right back to not losing money, doesn't it? It feels like the master strategy for many of them isn't about hitting home runs, but just consistently avoiding really big, stupid mistakes.
Absolutely. Avoiding catastrophe.
Yeah.
You hear echoes of Stoic philosophy here, building that inner strength, that resilience, so that when bad things inevitably happen in the world or in the market, you can withstand them. You can control your reactions so external chaos doesn't force you into a ruinous decision.
And if you avoid those big losses, that's what allows the power of compounding to really work its magic, even with just small or moderate gains. Tom Gaynor, for instance, is described as being radically moderate about almost everything. He thinks extreme approaches just aren't sustainable.
Right. It's like the Kaizen principle, continuous small incremental improvements over a very long time. Those huge life-changing investment wins. They're usually not from one giant risky bet. They're the result of stringing together lots of small, sensible advances year after year, decade after decade.
Which all comes down to deferred gratification, fundamentally. Nick Sleep apparently calls the ability to resist short-term urges a big superpower.
Yeah, because think about what ruins most investors. It's those short-term fixes, right? Chasing hot stocks, panic selling, trading too often, all the stuff that feels active and maybe even momentarily good, but just erodes capital over time.
So if that urge for the quick fix is so strong, how do you fight it? Is there a trick? The book suggests maybe rewarding yourself by really savoring the idea of the long-term payoff. You mentally connect the patience, the reading, the waiting with the future pleasure of that big success. It makes patience itself feel rewarding. Hashtag tag outro.
So if you pull all these threads together, you start to see the market, well, almost as this kind of comedy of errors, maybe a festival of folly, as someone put it. It's driven by Mr. Market's wild mood swings, from crazy optimism to paralyzing fear, often in the space of weeks or months.
Right. And that very folly, the emotional mistakes other people make, that becomes the consistent, reliable opportunity for the investor who can stay disciplined and rational. It brings you back to that simple, almost profound observation from Buffett. If you can just be a slightly above average investor and crucially spend less than you earn over a lifetime, you almost can't help but get very wealthy.
But, and this is a key but, wealth doesn't just come from following rules, not even these rules we've talked about. It also comes from questioning assumptions, even deeply held academic theories. Howard Marks talks a lot about the limits of theory versus, common sense.
Ah, you mean his famous story about the $5 bill, the one he found on the floor at Harvard Business School?
Exactly. It wasn't a hypothetical. He actually found a folded $5 bill in the library there. And he keeps it, apparently, as a reminder. Why? Because the finance professor with him wouldn't pick it up. The professor argued, based on the efficient market hypothesis, that if it were a real $5 bill just lying there, someone else would have already grabbed it. Therefore, it couldn't be real.
Huh. That's brilliant. And a great final thought for people to maybe chew on. That $5 bill represents what
Yeah,
right?
I love that.
That maybe the real value isn't in the most efficient places everyone is watching, but in the less efficient corners, or just in seeing what the elegant theories sometimes miss. The idea seems to be always question what everyone believes, whether that belief is wildly optimistic or deeply pessimistic. Maybe the best investment is just ensuring you're the one thinking for yourself.